Human intelligence is tricky stuff. We actually know very little about it. It's shocking how little we know about our intelligence. In fact, it's shocking how little we know about language. It's really shocking how little we know about knowledge in and of themselves. We're really not very intelligent about intelligence. We're not very well informed about language, which is sort of one of the primary tools we use to understand the world around us and to communicate. Even mathematics, it's still a little confusing for us as a people and certainly as individuals. And each of us is different. We each have different grasps of these fundamental features of experience: intelligence, language, and knowledge. One thing that's interesting to me is that modern humans are absolutely fascinated with mechanical technologies. And they don't seem to think much of the biorelational basis of life on Earth. No, they don't, especially their collectives. Many of the individuals do, even though it's hard to say how many of the individuals have much of a sense of what it is that we refer to when we speak of nature. Truly what it is, although we all have an intuitive sense and we're all human beings, so we're speaking a part of ourselves. But we don't know a lot about the language that we use to describe our world to ourselves and the ramifications it might have for our intelligence and for our world. We're very fascinated with technology. We know a lot about what to do with electricity and computation. We don't know much about what to do with language to radically increase our intelligence right now. We're very interested in building intelligent machines. We haven't succeeded in producing even a small intelligent culture yet. Not one that I can see. I haven't even seen a single example of one. I've seen examples that begin to look close for a few moments, but not on any large scale. And most of the large-scale stuff we produce is fairly strange, and definitely estranged from nature. In order to understand why that is, we're going to need to examine the technologies of language and knowledge. And I think we're going to need together to learn and discover how to become intelligent, because we haven't managed that yet. We've got a hold of a ghost that claims to be nobility and intelligence and truth and clear seeing, but really is something very, very different from that, as you can see by the results at the collective level and in nature. And in order to understand language a little better, I made a set of models that I could play with. And one of them I call holophores. I'm going to examine one holophore here. To briefly state what a holophore is, it's a root concept that lies underneath language and informs all of language's meaning and power. And usually these roots are unspoken and unnoticed. We completely overlook them, much like we do the fact that if you look around where we are right now, you'll probably notice that you're absolutely surrounded by rectangles. Look at everything around you. I'm in a room right now where I would say 80% of the objects are rectangular. Until I was actively introduced to that fact, I never noticed it. When I say 80% is rectangular, I mean everything: the windows, the doors, the books, this screen, the objects I'm using to record this, actually the microphone I'm using, the interface for the application, my keyboard, my desk that all of this is sitting on, my bed, the rug, my television, DVDs, every object around me is rectangular. That might be significant in a way we don't normally examine. I think it is. And in fact, underneath our language, there are some unexamined roots. There are well-known things like the sun, time, a tree, earth, the moon, woman, child, friend, food, dream, light, separation, intelligence. These words are peculiar, because if you change, now this is true of many words, but there are certain root elements that you can't get much more basic than. For example, separation. Take that away, no more concepts. The sun is another one around here, because everything was made in the sun. All of our language, all of our math, our religions, they're all, in fact, our bodies are solar expressions. So if you have the wrong idea about what the sun is, it could really damage your intelligence or possibly even prohibit it. In case this isn't really obviously clear, I think I can make it instantly clear by just referring to one of the root elements I mentioned, woman. We can see that on Earth, just the basic idea of woman, and of course what we truly think of and tell each other about women, is so misfounded that we can't be intelligent. In general, if you look around the world at modern cultures, we find such ridiculous ideas, so many ridiculously bizarre ideas about what it should mean to be a woman, what a woman is, who a woman is, how a woman is, their purposes and functions, the realities of womanhood. We find such bizarre ideas that we actually are prohibited from becoming intelligent, because the idea of woman refers to everything. We all came from one. How could it not refer to every single thing? So if we have the wrong idea about what a woman is, how will we get the right idea about anything? Huh? Hopefully you can see the logic there. It's similar with the idea of a tree or an animal, friend. And some of these things have opposites, and both of them work, right? Friend or enemy, separation or unity. What I'm going to talk about today is time. Most of us are familiar with clock time, and we may understand that there's experiential time, but we might not formally separate those two. We should. But there's some other times some other forms of time I want to explore with you briefly today, because I think you'll find them very interesting, and there's some things we need to learn about time in order to just have a chance of becoming intelligent together. Now, we've been through a few revolutions in our modern moment, most notably that brought on by relativity. I'm not a scientist. I'm just an ordinary person like anyone else. In fact, I'm largely self-educated, and my educational background would probably normally be described as impoverished. But nonetheless, I'm astonishingly curious, and I've had some unusual opportunities to learn in my life. And time is something we've really greatly misunderstood. In fact, we haven't even caught up. We're not even close to catching up with Einstein, with what Einstein and his colleagues and peers revealed to us back in their day. And I think I'll be able to demonstrate that to you very rapidly here now. So, one of the interesting things about each of those roots is we have to get them more and more right if we want to get more and more intelligent. And there are some ways of getting them wrong that will prohibit our intelligence. If we get them wrong in a certain way, we just can't be intelligent. And many of the ways that we think about very simple and obvious everyday phenomenon are like this. The roots of our intelligence are damaged, actually, by abstraction. This is what happens when we're overexposed to technology and we don't understand we lose touch with what it once represented. So when these roots get damaged, we can't become intelligent. By repairing them, we actually can repair other roots and our intelligence and our shot at having a future that is survivable and human and ecologically sound. Time is one of the most important of these. Understanding what the earth is, what an animal is, what the sun is are also crucially important. What a human being is or can be in a more and more correct way. There's no perfectly correct way for any of these. They're all targets that adjust as we chase them. That's the nature of intelligence, actually. So we can't just correct one and say, okay, there, the sun is fixed. But we can adjust them toward the truth dramatically. And when we do that, there's a radical effect in all of the other things we know. If you adjust the sun slightly toward the truth, or time slightly toward the truth, as Einstein did, and his colleagues, then what happens is your whole view of everything changes very dramatically, including yourself, what it means to have eyes, what it can be to be human. All of this changes. So I want to examine time with you, and I'm going to start with a couple of brief experiments. The first is that there's a very different kind of time that we don't much think about, and I call it biocognitive time. It means the time experienced by living organisms in a way that is relative to each other. So there's some kind of perhaps fuzzy but nonetheless discernible metric whereby, for example, we know that certain animals, at least this is what I've heard anyway, that certain animals share a similar heartbeat, even number of heartbeats in their lifetime, even though they live very different amounts of time. So that, I don't know, perhaps a hummingbird and a human being have somewhere close to the same amount of heartbeats, but those heartbeats transpire in different orders of time. So that the hummingbird lives perhaps 10 years or less, and the human may live 70 or 80. Same number of heartbeats. This implies a different rate of biological time. We also know that babies develop biologically very rapidly compared to adults, which is why they're peculiarly susceptible to biological and relational insult. They can get cancer and other diseases that come from being exposed to toxic environments very much more easily than adults. This is because there's a different kind of time happening in the child, and or time is happening at a unique rate. So we don't normally think that a person A and person B could be experiencing time at different rates, but they do. And there's also another form of time that we don't pay much attention to. I'm going to outline a few of these. So let's start with the first idea that we know what a year is. And that a year is something everybody can agree on. It's the same amount of time. Well, that's not true, because first of all, a year for a baby, and a year for a 20-year-old, and a year for a 50-year-old, and a year for a 90-year-old person. These are not the same span experientially or biologically. Not by a long shot. They're not really very similar at all, actually. If we could spread them out and check them against each other, I have a feeling we might find that the baby's was extremely long, and that they got shorter up until we got close to the elderly person, and then we might see some effects. I'm not sure exactly what they would be. But let's go a step further. We think we know what a year is, so imagine that you have a planet with nothing on it, and you spin that around a sun in the same position ours is, about the same size as our planet, around a sun about the same size as ours. So you've got an empty planet, you spin that around the sun, 360 some odd days. You get a year, as we abstract it. And true enough. What if you put one human on that planet, then you get one human life year? Or what if you put two? Each of those humans experiences a fairly unique year, even though they may have shared experience. Don't you agree? Therefore, they are each kind of a unique bubble of time, aren't they? And so if you spin that around the sun one time, you get 2 years. But you see, currently there are 7 billion people on Earth. So what that actually does mean is that if you spin that around the sun one time, you get 7 billion human life years per year. Have we been paying attention to that? Now, the same is true of the animal and ecological populations, which we've been decimating, unfortunately, except that they exist at a much faster rate of speed than us. And even our own children exist at a much faster rate of speed than us. So that 1 year, if we took just the people, right, and took all the other things off the planet and spun just the people around the Earth, we'd get more than 7 billion, because some of those children would be living 10 years per year. Similarly, if we add in all the other kinds of life living at all the other different rates of speed, we have something very profound indeed. Now, we have actually orders of biocognitive temporality that inform each other in a wave-like fashion that we participate in and perhaps depend upon. We've been tearing that web apart, the web of living time, and establishing mechanical objects in its place, like the one you're listening to this on, and the one that I'm recording it on. And those objects actually compete directly with, they're physically converting biological time into mechanical time right now. They're doing that by erasing organisms and ecosystems and their possibility of existing on Earth in all kinds of different ways. That doesn't mean they're only bad. It means that our intelligence is misfunctioning wildly, And part of that has to do with a misunderstanding about what time is and the different kinds of time there are, because we are a mode of time, and I intend to demonstrate that. One of the things we didn't understand about what Einstein told us was that space and time are somehow, in a way that's difficult for us to easily make images about in our mind, they are the same thing. This doesn't mean that they both go together. That's not necessarily what they mean, although we may have to treat them that way for purposes of science that we can understand. But what it does mean is something pretty radical that nobody's been paying any attention to. It means that space is time. Now, if you think about this carefully, and you look out into space from Earth, and just look at what we can see, right, which we may not understand its meaning or identity very well. We only know, sort of in a vague way, is that gas? Is that matter? Is that energy? Is that a planet? Is it stone? What is it? We have some vague idea. Is it ice? We can do spectrography and things, and we can learn about the substances that we see, right, and what is interfering with light between us and objects that we see. And we can use this in incredibly intelligent ways to learn all kinds of interesting things. But we fail to understand something pretty basic, which is what we see when we look away from Earth is all temporal phenomenon. And our science understands material phenomenon, but it doesn't understand temporal phenomenon. Well, material phenomenon is temporal phenomenon. A planet is a time thing. It's a mode of time, in the same way that it's a mode of space, the solid, the complex solid. In our case, there's something really strange going on. We've got a complex solid called the sun that generates what we call light and energy and heat. We've got a complex solid called the earth that generates sentiences. And then we've got some other complex solids called planets, which we're not entirely sure about. But if we just look at these three kinds of local temporal phenomenon, we must presume something very peculiar about time. It is like organisms. It emits them as expressions of its nature. In fact, they are a mode of time. And thus, when you touch another being, human or otherwise, you're bridging two modes of temporality, and those modes are intelligent. Because it turns out that locally around here, where time and space come together, you get sentience, you get creatures with eyes and minds so profound and provocative that they can transform the meaning of reality merely by interacting with it. They are amechanical. They have nothing to do with machines. They do not have parts. In fact, they are like distributed relational networks that we don't have good language about, because all the elements are at once local and non-local in astonishing ways that, again, our languages keep us from discovering. But what I want you to understand is that when Einstein was telling us that time and space are the same thing, and no matter what science may imply, there's something very peculiar going on in that modes of time are uniquely expressive of intelligence, and they happen to be clustered right here on Earth all around us. We're burning them down to make machines. That can't be intelligent. Perhaps we've misunderstood what time really is when we began to measure it instead of directly experiencing it. So if we look around on Earth, and if you look at, say, a forest or the ocean, what you're seeing is an astonishing array of modes of relational time interbeing with one another in such a way as to co-develop and advance both the field of play and each constituent in various ways. Of course, new forms emerge and some depart. Not all are to be preserved. And over time, perhaps none of these specific forms will be preserved. But when we look out into space and we see phenomenon such as, well, space itself, what is that? Because Einstein asked us to understand it as time, and we must. And what that means is that when we see a galaxy, we're seeing an expression of temporality. We're seeing an embodiment of a mode of temporality, of modes of temporality within each other, within themselves, yes, recursively, reinforming the entire structure. But what about space itself? What about just distance? Or what about a pulsar or a quasar? What about a black hole? Well, each of these phenomenon, these are temporal phenomenon. These are expressions of the nature and character of time, not just matter. Matter is just one piece. We've bracketed off time and abstracted it for the purposes of leveraging that abstraction scientifically. That's very useful in the correct contexts. But we've ignored some of the ramifications of our discoveries, many of them, especially in language. What is dark matter? Allow me to suggest it's an unthinkably peculiar mode of time. And time expresses itself at our scale as intelligence. In our bodies, in our world, there's a relational intelligence that is infinitely, unthinkably profound. Its true nature is unvisitable by language. And I think our dependence on language too often blinds us to what's going on very near at hand. All the different creatures are different modes and speeds of time, and they are also different representations of our own possible features of intelligence, real features, not just possible, but real features of our own intelligence and nature. Every being, every relationship, every aspect of temporality in the sky and here on earth. What does it mean that some aspect of time produces stars, and that as living expressions of those stars, you're hearing my voice? My voice is somehow the voice of that star, and does not even belong to me in that sense, but to something so profound and unthinkable that we're going to have to loosen our grip on knowledge before we're going to have any chance of even looking in that direction together. Now I want to play a couple of other games with time with you before we wrap this up. The first one is, I want you to imagine two places in your own life. I'm going to say, I'm going to presume you know something about your birth, so I'll pick that one. And then say your 10th birthday, wherever that might have taken place. And if you haven't had that yet, pick a smaller one. And if you can't remember that one, pick a nearer one. I want you to imagine three different modes of space-time. The first mode is, as a crow flies, as the clock tolls between your birth and your 10th birthday. The location on Earth in time and space, where Earth was in space, on your birth, and then the location in time and space far away from where Earth was in space 10 years ago, in more ways than one. But not so much worrying about that. Let's stay on Earth. So the location on Earth where you were born and the time between that and your 10th birthday, and the location where you had your 10th birthday. So first think about it in a kind of a straight line as the crow flies. Just think about, the number of moments between those two events and the straight line distance. Maybe it's hundreds of miles, maybe it's in the same house, who knows? And then think about, but even if it's in the same house, realize that the temporal distance could have even been in the same room. Maybe you were born in the room where you had your 10th birthday, but the temporal distance is still dramatic. Very dramatic. It's 10 years. So there's a real distance there. But let's take a third kind of distance that we normally don't think about. Think about the relational distance between your birth and your 10th birthday. In other words, think about all of the relationships and changes in them, seen and unseen, known and unknown. All of the moments of relation with beings, places, objects, situations, ideas, feelings, thoughts, dreams, food, the sky, the sun, time. Think about all those relationships and then traverse the distance between your birth and your 10th birthday, and you'll have relational time, a dimension of time we don't ordinarily include in our mathematics, and yet is perhaps the most fundamental of all of them. Now, when I take a small insect upon my finger, say a praying mantis, this is a creature that well knows all the things I've taught you and probably more in its own unique way. Time begins to warp as the two distinct speeds and modes of time come together in mutual interest, discovery, and unity. And while you've been listening, that's been happening between you and me and all of the different modes of time with which I am in touch. What an exquisite grace that has been. What an honor. I look forward to learning so much more together and to perhaps discovering what it would be like to truly become intelligent together. Let's find out.